Kings and queens, ladies and gentlemen, it is Tuesday, and we are back again with another lesson. Today, we're going to be on Math 7 Unit 1, Lesson 7b. Today is Tuesday, October 20th, 2020. Our classroom norms for today are that your cameras are to be on at this point, your mics are muted unless you are speaking, of course, and that you guys are ready to learn and chat. The materials that you will need for today's lesson, you will need your Math 7 Spiral Notebook. We are working on page 17 of your Spiral Notebook. And of course, you will need a pencil and the student companion that is found in Google Classroom. Remember, we need to make sure that we're getting credit for our participation during our live class time, and you get that by doing your student companion that is found in Google Classroom. So, we are talking about day 2 of revisiting proportional relationships, and specifically proportional relationships with fractions. Our standards for today are 7.rp.1 and 7.rp.2, and our objectives are students will calculate and interpret orally the constant of proportionality for a proportional relationship involving fractional quantities, explain how to use a table with only 2 rows to solve a problem involving a proportional relationship, and also write an equation to represent a given proportional relationship with a fractional constant of proportionality. So a lot of academic language and vocabulary there. And our mathematical practices are MP2, which is reason abstractly and quantitatively, and MP3, which is construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others. We want to make sure that we're always ready to take notes and work collaboratively when necessary. So we'll pause the video here briefly so that you guys can copy down your standard and your objectives for today. All right, moving right along. Let's jump to our engagement activity. Our engagement activity today is also found in your student companion. So we want to make sure that at this point, our student companion from Google Classroom is open, and we are going to go ahead and work on this table. It says a recipe calls for a half a cup of sugar and 1 cup of flour. We want to complete the table to show how much sugar and flour to use in different numbers of batches for the recipe. So we've kind of done this before. We want to be able to show what the missing values in the table are. So let's take about 1 minute. We'll pause the video here so that you guys can complete the engagement activity, and then we'll ask several of you all to share out what your thinking was. So we'll pause here and give you time to complete this table. All right, so hopefully we realized that there were multiple ways that we could have solved this. We could have used what we know about scale factors to find equivalent ratios, for instance, like multiplying the first row by something to get the second row, or using the constant of proportionality between the first column and the second column. So we know different ways to solve this problem. So let's figure out what the missing side lengths were. So of course, our starting row, we had 1/2 cups of sugar for 1 cup of flour. Then we have 3/4 cups of sugar is going to use 1.5 or 1 5/10 cups of flour. So for 3/4, we're going to have 1.5. And then the next row, 7/8, 7/8 cups of sugar is for 1 3/4 cups of flour. And then for 1 cup of sugar, this one should have been an easy one. We need 2 cups of flour because we just doubled it from our first row, 1/2, and we doubled it to 1. So we're going to double 1 and make it 2. So for 1 cup of sugar, we have 2 cups of flour. And then our last row is 1 1/4. So 1 1/4 cups of sugar is for 2.5 cups of flour. So let's make sure that we have those correct answers in our student companion. If we need to rewind a little bit, we can do so now. Otherwise, let's keep moving. So, our goals for today are going to be as follows. The first thing that we want to be able to do is we want to make sure that you can use a table with two rows and two columns to find an unknown value in a proportional relationship. And then we also want to know when there is a constant rate that we can identify the two quantities that are in a proportional relationship. So let's go to our exploration activity. Once again, this can be found in your student companion on page 2. So as we're going over this, we want to make sure that we're inputting our answers into this portion of our student companions. So the exploration activity is entitled The Price of Rope. And here we are. Let's jump right in. So it says at a hardware store, they can cut a length of rope off of a big roll so you can buy any length that you like. So the cost for 6 feet of rope is $7.50. And we want to know how much would you pay for 50 feet of rope at this rate? So if you look at this table that's on our screen, we see what Lynn's method was. We had a table starting with $6 and we multiply by 2. We get to 12, then to 24, then to 48. But then again, if I noticed here when I went from 6 to 2, they multiply by 1/3, and to go from 2 to 25, we multiply, or 2 to 50, we multiply by 25. So if I multiply from 2 to 50 by 25, $2.50 times 25 would give me the answer for how much it would be for 50. So I want you guys to take about 2 to 3 minutes to figure out what it would cost for 50 feet of rope. And then also be ready to discuss why Lynn multiplied by 1/3. So let's pause here for about 2 to 3 minutes of work time to answer that question, and then we'll come back together. All right. So I would love for one person to go ahead and share what their answer was for what 50 feet of rope would cost. I would also like for somebody to then share, or a few of you guys to share, why you think that Lynn decided to multiply by 1/3. Okay. So hopefully your answer that you found for 50 was $62.50. You could have noticed that from 48, all I had to do was increase it by $2.50 since we were increasing by twos. Or, like we said earlier, all I had to do was multiply by 25 because that's what the table was instructing me to do. Okay, so let's keep moving right along. So the next part of this student companion says Kieran versus Priya. So we want to know who is more efficient. So, based off of these methods, what would Kieran's answer be? So, it looks like to go from 1 to 50, Kieran is going to multiply by 50, which gives us $1.25 times 50. So, based off of this, let's take some time in your student companion to be what would Kieran's answer be? And then let's also look at Priya's method. Priya says that she can solve the table with only two rows. So let's think about what would her method be if she's only solving it with two rows. So again, we're going to take about 3 minutes to put this into your student companion. This is the answers for question number 1, where it says Kieran knows he can solve the problem this way. What would be Kieran's answer? And then you're also going to answer number 2 about what do you think Priya's method is, and then we're going to come back together. So let's take about 3 minutes. We'll pause here so you guys can work based off of this table that's shown on the screen and in your student companion, and then we'll come back together. Okay. So the question for number one, talking about what is Karen's answer, hopefully you realize that Karen also gets $62.50 because if we did the multiplication of 1.25 times 50, it does in fact give us $62.50. So we still got the same answer. So that was one possible method to solve. Now, hopefully you realize when you got to number two, for Priya's method, Priya probably just figured out what the unit rate was. So if I took $7.50 divided by 6, it would have given me 1.25, which is the unit rate, the same way that we found in Karen's answer, right? So all we had to do in our heads once we figured out what 7, remember we divide our second column by our first column. Once I did $7.50 divided by 6 and got 1.25, I just had to multiply 50 by 1.25 to get the same answer of $62.50. So that was probably what Priya's method was, to actually use the unit rate. So let's dive a little deeper. There were two different methods that we used here. We used the scale factor method, where we just did some division to figure out how to get from 6 to 50 and what would be next to find the next missing value. Or we used the constant proportionality method, which is finding the unit rate. Remember, when we did $7.50 divided by 6, it gave us 1.25. Or if I'm trying to figure out how to go from 6 to 750, it's multiplying by 1.25. So that will also give me my final answer. So we should have known, what is the constant proportionality? Well, we said it was 1.25 uh, as our price for 1 foot of rope. And we found that by taking our second column of $7.50 and dividing it by 6 to get 1.25. It asks us, what does the constant of proportionality mean in this story? So that just means that for 1 foot of rope, it costs $1.25, or $1.25 is the price for 1 foot of rope. And then personally, it asks me which method is my preference to use. Honestly, finding the constant proportionality is a lot easier than finding the scale factor sometimes, because there are fractions that we don't necessarily want to work with. So when in doubt, you can always use the constant proportionality or find the unit rate. That way you can answer any problem that is coming to you, because we all know that they are proportional relationships. So we're going to move to our elaboration activity at this time, once again, which is also found in your student companion. That is on page 4, and there are 3 questions. And the title of the elaboration activity is Swimming and Painting. So this is just going to build on what we just did. It says Tyler swims at a constant speed, 5 meters for every 4 seconds. And we want to know, how long does it take him to swim 114 meters, and be prepared to share with the class. The first thing that we want to know is, what method will you use to find this? And then write an equation to represent the proportional relationship. So we'll give you about 3 minutes to work on this on your own, and then we'll come back together. So let's go ahead and go over this. For me, I would have used, once again, the unit rate or constant proportionality method. So taking 4 divided by 5, which is 4 over 5, and figuring out what that number is. So when I do 4 divided by 5, it gives me 0.8. So all I have to do now is multiply 114 by 0.8, and I get the answer 91.2 seconds. That would have been the easiest way for me to figure this out. Then the second part says to write an equation. So I could have written an equation in the form y equals kx, and the constant of proportionality was 0.8, or you could have used a fraction 4 over 5. So it would be y equals 0.8k, or y equals 4 over 5k. Either one of those are acceptable. Or if you use the actual descriptors that were here, time and distance, you could have said t is equal to 0.8d or t is equal to 4 over 5d. So those could have been your answers. Now, it says a certain shade of light blue paint is made by mixing 1 and 1/2 quarts of blue paint with 5 quarts of white paint. How much white paint would you need to mix with 4 quarts of blue paint? And then we want to write an equation to represent the proportional relationship. So obviously we're going to use this table of blue paint quarts to white paint quarts. So let's go ahead and take another 2 minutes, and I want you guys to complete this in your student companion. Okay, so hopefully you're noticing that the first line of your table should have been 1 and 1/2 quarts of blue paint, and in the second column it'll have been 5 quarts of white paint. So I needed to figure out what 5 divided by 1.5 would be to figure out my unit rate. And then use that to figure out the next part. So your answer should have been 13 1/3. That's a little difficult to figure out. Or it could have been 10 over 3. So either one of those answers would have been plausible. Now, let's keep moving. Here is our word wall for today. Of course, we've been talking about proportional relationships, and we also discussed two different methods to solve these tables. We talked about the scale factor method, and then we also talked about the constant of proportionality method. So either one of these are possible for us to solve these problems. So let's recap a little bit. We want to know, how can we use the table that only has 2 rows to solve a problem about a proportional relationship? Well, we talked about that. We know that we can use the constant of proportionality method if it only has 2 rows. If it has more than 2 rows, then of course we can use the scale factor method, and we can use that for a table that has 2 rows as well. It just might be a little bit more difficult. So if we go back to the scale factor method, remember, if I take the second number and divide it by the first number, so in this case 50 divided by 60, that'll give me the answer for the scale factor method. Okay? So it also says, what is the best method to use to solve for a value in proportional relationship with a constant rate? And again, it's your preference. But for me, I tend to like the constant of proportionality method best. So our goals for today, once again, were to make sure that we can use a table with 2 rows and 2 columns to find an unknown value in a proportional relationship. And also, when there's a constant rate, we wanted to be able to identify the two quantities that are in a proportional relationship. So here is your evaluation activity for today. This is the last part of your student companion. We're going to go over it, and it says the evaluation is walnuts in bulk. And it says it costs $3.45 to buy 3/4 pounds of chopped walnuts. How much would it cost to purchase 7.5 pounds of walnuts? And explain or show your reasoning. So in your student companion, it already gives you a table for you to fill in. So we're going to take 3 minutes so that you guys can answer the evaluation activity and then submit it on Google Classroom. So let's pause the video here. All right. Thank you guys so much for answering that evaluation activity and submitting your student companion on Google Classroom. Let's go ahead and wrap up for today. So we've already gone over our wrap up for today. Remember, our next session is not going to happen until Thursday because tomorrow is small group time. So your directions for your independent activities. For today's independent activity, you have learning target problems that are going to be found in Google Classroom, which I will show you in just a second. Then on Wednesday, you're going to have a Big Ideas workbook assignment. Remember, we want to make sure that we're submitting all of our work, ladies and gentlemen, because we want to make sure that we're getting the best grades as possible. So for Tuesday's assignment, which is today, you guys will have a worksheet that looks like this. And it looks like it's a lot, but they're all multiple choice and it's actually only 4 questions. So really quickly, the learning target is the student friendly language, and you just have to tell us whether or not you can highlight this and mark it or however you want to do, and just say whether or not you can recognize and represent proportional relationships. If you can, you're going to say yes. If you don't really know how to do this still, you're going to say no. And if you're not sure, you're going to mark not sure. And you're going to do that for the first column. And then you're going to answer the second column where the problems are. And then you're just going to read the problem and then choose what your best answer is, whether it's A, B, C, D, E, or F, and go down to, and then enter your answer here. And then do the same for problems 2, 3, and 4. So your only responsibility is to answer the learning target column and the problem column. The column that says error analysis is for teacher feedback. This is where I'm going to input some feedback based on your answers. So you're only responsible for the learning target column and the problem column. And that is your assignment for Tuesday. And then once again, your assignment for Wednesday is the Big Ideas workbook assignment that will be posted in Google Classroom. At this point, we are done our lesson for Tuesday. So remember to stay safe, ladies and gentlemen, and enjoy the rest of your day. And we will see you guys on Thursday. Have a great one.